Melissa sat on the very edge of my sofa, visibly distraught and on the verge of tears. She began to tell me that for the past 3 months, she's been having almost daily episodes where her heart will race, her stomach gets tied up in knots, and she feels dizzy. She goes on to say that these episodes are terrifying, and she's worried she will lose her mind. As she begins to cry, she shares that she wakes up each morning with the same thought. Will it happen again today? As a psychologist, I've seen hundreds of Melissas, women, men, children, all who share something similar, which is debilitating anxiety. Some people experience a few symptoms, such as difficulty breathing, blurry vision. Other people experience many symptoms: racing heart, upset stomach, nausea, chills, hot flashes. But pretty much everyone who comes to see me has this in common: the fear that it will never go away. And almost no one can answer this question initially, which is, what message is your anxiety trying to tell you? You see, anxiety is our body's life-saving system that helps get us ready to deal with danger. Our body prepares us to fight danger, run away from it, or freeze in the sight of it. This is really convenient if you find yourself face to face with an oncoming bus. But if you're sitting in your living room and there's no grizzly bear present with you, then the danger is probably more perceived rather than visible. But the body reacts the same way. And those bodily reactions can be so terrifying. It's understandable we don't stop to consider what they're trying to tell us. Now, while anxiety is normal, anxiety disorders are not, and we're experiencing them in epidemic proportions. An estimated 40 million adults will meet criteria for an anxiety disorder in any given year. And according to the Anxiety and Depression Disorders Association of America, only about 1/3 of those who've been diagnosed will receive adequate mental health care treatment. At the same time, though, we're spending over $42 billion a year on the repeated use of healthcare services. So it appears our focus is on managing the physical sensations of anxiety. But I'm proposing that anxiety is a messenger that's trying to point us to something important. If this is true, we need to get to the source of where the anxiety is coming from. Now, there's many possibilities, but for some people, what underlies their anxiety is an undetected and unresolved experience of trauma. When trauma goes unresolved, it continues to impact the sufferer, sometimes in very subtle ways. Anxiety is one way that buried trauma manifests itself, whispering to the sufferer there's something important to uncover and address. Now, when I use the word trauma, sometimes I see a flash of fear roll across people's faces. Our fear of trauma causes us to deny its existence. Our misunderstanding of trauma causes us to minimize the impact of the disturbing events in our lives. Now, it's understandable that the nature and scope of trauma is not clear to a lot of people. In fact, it wasn't until 1980 that we had our first good working definition of trauma. At that time, the DSM-3, or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, defined trauma as a catastrophic stressor that's outside the range of usual human experience. In other words, trauma was viewed as an event that is rare. Now, this definition was a big step forward in our understanding of trauma, but there were a couple important pieces still missing. One is the fact that it's not an event itself that makes something traumatic, but an individual's experience of that event. Therefore, the same event can be experienced as traumatic for some people, but not for others. The other piece is that trauma is actually quite common, and we now label events as being either big T or little t traumas. Big T traumas are the things that the authors of the DSM were thinking of, such as domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, war. But little t traumas, they're common events that we all experience. In fact, little t traumas often aren't recognized as trauma at all, but in some cases, they can be as wounding and long-lasting as big T traumas. Now, examples of little t traumas are innumerable, but a few include the loss of a relationship, bullying or teasing, death of a pet, or public humiliation. The crucial point here is that little t traumas, when they go unresolved, even if they occurred decades ago, they can cause problems. One of those problems can be anxiety. Remember Melissa, who I introduced you to earlier? Well, like many others, she first sought medical attention and then therapy for her anxiety. The onset of her panic attacks was a mystery to her, and she made no connection between her current difficulties and any events from her past. This is not a criticism of Melissa. We tend to believe that anxiety symptoms are the problem. But anxiety is a messenger that's trying to tell us something is wrong. If we simply kill the messenger, we don't get to the message. Eradicating the symptoms of anxiety, while it brings much needed relief to the sufferer, might not resolve the true problem. It might be more like pulling a weed out from the top rather than digging underneath to get at the root. Melissa was experiencing difficulties at work with a coworker who was taking advantage of her time and disrespecting her in various ways. We connected her current experience with a much earlier experience of bullying that she suffered during middle school. During the bullying, Melissa believed that she had lost her voice. We were able to tie that belief and its accompanying emotions to her current approach with the coworker. Ultimately, Melissa's belief, I have no voice, was rooted in the earlier little t trauma of bullying, and it was underlying her anxiety. So by processing through the bullying via an innovative therapy known as EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, Melissa was then able to set appropriate boundaries with the coworker. Her debilitating anxiety ceased. Melissa was able to tell the coworker when her boundaries were being violated without her voice wavering or tears coming up. She no longer worried about what might go wrong with this person. She wasn't looking over her shoulder or thinking about being judged. Melissa was able to transfer these behaviors into new situations. This was huge, being able to speak up with confidence without being triggered by any events from her past. Melissa's new belief, I can use my voice, replaced her old hindering belief. So can you imagine taking a situation where you feel anxious and looking at what events from your past might be triggering how you're feeling and behaving? If this question sparks anxiety in you, you're not alone. Many people are actually terrified to bring to the forefront what they're feeling internally and truly experiencing their emotions. People can be afraid of that they'll get lost in those emotions and lose control. But actually, the opposite is true. If we're willing to wrestle with our memories, feelings, and the beliefs attached to them, we can regain control over those situations. We can develop what's known as a future template, or a healthier way of responding when similar situations come up in the future. This is the essence of EMDR therapy. But we cannot begin to heal, function, or thrive until we start telling the truth about how we got here. And I know this, not only from my 28 years of clinical practice, but from all my years of just being a person. On Christmas Eve, 18 years ago, I was putting my 14-month-old son Patrick down for his afternoon nap. He giggled and smiled at me as I tickled his chubby little sides. And it was a perfectly peaceful and calm afternoon. I had no idea that in the next minute, my life was about to take a sudden and dramatic turn. and that ultimately it would be the next critical step in my own healing journey. My husband came into the room and he said words he never spoke before, which were, "Your father's on the phone." Have you ever had one of those moments where your mouth goes completely dry and your legs turn to jelly? Well, then you know how I felt. See, it had been 27 years since my last significant conversation with my father. I don't remember much about that initial phone call, except he thanked me over and over again for the Christmas card I sent. Yes, I did mail a Christmas card on December 23rd to absolutely guarantee it would arrive after Christmas. But despite a series of obstacles such as the 2,000-mile distance, heavy snowstorm, a substitute mailman that left the card out on a chair, and a gust of wind that blew that card into a snowbank, despite all that, that card miraculously reached my father's hands within a mere 24 hours. So his phone call was a shock. 5 months later, I found myself standing at LAX waiting for my father's plane to arrive. Anxiety doesn't begin to describe how I felt, so to cope with that, I rehearsed how our initial meeting might go. Would I shake his hand, give him a hug, call him Dad, or call him by his first name? None of my rehearsal prepared me for the visual of my father descending down the escalator at the airport. He immediately recognized me, but he looked nothing like the photographs I had of him. He had long gray hair, a white beard, high forehead and oversized glasses, twinkling eyes and a captivating smile. So naturally I thought, my father is Jerry Garcia. Okay, I didn't really believe that, but that visual was not something I was expecting. And there was something else I wasn't expecting either, and that was the onset of persistent anxiety. In many ways, reconnecting with my father was easy, natural, and full of joy. But at the same time, something else was happening. My stomach was constantly upset. My heart would start beating out of my chest for no apparent reason, and I was getting terrible headaches. I did all the things I tell my clients to do to regulate their anxiety: relaxation, good self-talk. I tried meditation. I even took medication. But nothing I did could get those symptoms under control. In fact, they got worse. I started having flashbacks and nightmares to childhood trauma that my father wasn't even there to witness. My PTSD, which had been in remission for years, was back in full force. And it was a mystery to me. How could the wonderful event of reconnecting with my father coincide with reliving of trauma that he wasn't even a part of? Well, bottom line was my trauma wasn't as resolved as I thought, and I needed a solution. So I underwent the same EMDR as Melissa. Now, there's a reason I am telling you about this specific type of therapy. If our brain and our body can use anxiety to send a message that something is wrong, our brain and our body can also help us to heal from what is wrong. EMDR helps people to process through distressing memories. EMDR challenges limiting beliefs that govern significant parts of our behavior. And it enables us to step forward in our lives with healthier beliefs. Now, I want you to know that not all anxiety is rooted in deep trauma like mine was. And there are a number of effective ways to address both anxiety and trauma issues. But what I want you to know is that treating anxiety solely to relieve symptoms often isn't the best solution for the long term. I see with many of my clients that they get the best, most long-lasting results when they're also willing to do the deeper work. Now, the deeper work is not easy. It can be painful and exhausting. One important task of therapy is to help people to move away from repressing emotions and toward experiencing and processing them. With a little help, we can learn to tolerate intense emotions without getting lost in them. We were meant to live in the here and now. We don't have to live in the there and then. That seemingly long, dark, endless tunnel of anxiety, well, it can become a path toward a bright and comforting light. If you are someone who suffers from anxiety, I want you to know you do not have to live this way. Anxiety should be a temporary messenger, not a permanent resident in your life. I want you to remember that while relief from your suffering, it's really important, but it's equally important to consider why you are suffering. In other words, what message is your anxiety trying to tell you? This is a worthwhile endeavor to ponder over, but don't be discouraged if the answer doesn't come readily. And if you love someone who's suffering, please be patient with them. Sometimes we all need a little help to figure things out. As a psychologist, I thought I could get myself out of my own pain and struggle, and I couldn't. Even people at the top of their field, such as professional athletes, entrepreneurs, musicians, they don't go it alone. They have coaches, teachers, mentors. I will leave you with this quote from 19th century theologian W.G.T. Shedd, who said, "A ship in the harbor is safe, but that's not what ships were built for." Anxiety and trauma issues can be paralyzing, and healing can feel risky. But embracing our lives, our dreams, and our passions, that's what we were created for. The payoff for taking the risk of facing these issues head on is well worth it. Thank you.